The village of Hohlbach, little more than a cluster of timber-framed houses and barns, lay hidden in the valley of the Thaya River in southern Moravia during the mid-19th century. The landscape was severe: steep wooded hillsides, heavy mists rolling down from the highlands in autumn, and winters so long that even the river seemed to groan under its own frozen surface. Founded in the late 1500s by German-speaking settlers fleeing border wars, Hohlbach was, by the 1840s, a farming hamlet of scarcely 300 souls. The economy was built on flax cultivation, sheep herding, and small-scale brewing. Houses stood shoulder to shoulder along the single muddy lane, their whitewashed walls and dark beams perpetually stained with smoke from peat fires. A single Catholic church, St. Walpurgis, with its squat Romanesque tower, dominated the northern end of the lane, while to the south lay the village inn Zum Schwarzen, its name painted in fading ochre letters on worm-eaten wood. Outwardly, Hohlbach was unremarkable, one among hundreds of Moravian villages recorded in the tax rolls of the Habsburg Empire. Yet in the archival records of Znojmo District Court, beginning in the year 1843, one finds repeated mentions of a disturbing phenomenon that would come to define the village in whispers and fearful legends. Brides of Hohlbach were vanishing on their wedding night. The first documented disappearance was that of Clara Weiss, daughter of a flax merchant who married a brewer's son on November 12, 1843. Parish records confirm the ceremony at St. Walpurgis. The feast was described in detail in later testimony: roasted goose, strong red wine, and music provided by 2 fiddlers. Yet when dawn broke, Clara was gone. Her husband, Josef Reiter, stated in his deposition to district officials on November 14, 1843, "I awoke before cockcrow and found her place beside me cold. The door was shut from within, yet she was nowhere in the house. Her bridal crown lay upon the floor, the ribbon torn. There were no footprints outside, for frost had hardened the ground." Local searches yielded nothing. For months, speculation ranged from elopement to abduction by vagrants, though no ransom was ever demanded. The second case followed scarcely 6 months later. Magdalena Schiller, age 19, vanished from her father-in-law's farmhouse on May 2, 1844. Her husband, a quiet swineherd named Lorenz, was found in a near catatonic state, muttering of a shadow in the corner. He was later confined to the asylum at Brno. By the late 1840s, villagers spoke in hushed tones of die Brautnacht, the bride's night, as if it were a curse. Oral testimony collected in the early 20th century by ethnographer Hans Ziegler included the recollection of one elderly farmer. "It was never the courting girls, never the betrothed, only the ones who stood before the altar and returned with a wreath in their hair. That night was the last any man saw of them." To understand the dread that grew in Hohlbach, one must grasp the isolation of the place. The road leading into the valley was nearly impassable in winter. Messages to Znojmo often took days. Superstition thrived. Families whispered of the Pact of the Founders, a phrase that appears in no official record before the 1850s, but which became a cornerstone of village lore. In 1851, following the disappearance of Anna Maria Lowe, the third bride in 8 years, district magistrates opened a formal investigation. Reports survive in fragmented condition, with several pages missing. An archivist's note in 1923 states that files appeared deliberately excised. One remaining page bears the chilling testimony of Father Karl Mertens, priest of St. Walpurgis. "I have buried many daughters of this parish, yet not these. No body was given to the earth, only silence. The husbands plead for mercy, the families rage for justice. But I tell you this, something older than our church lays its hand upon this valley. The magistrate's inquiry concluded inconclusively, citing domestic instability and possible flight as explanations, though no evidence supported these claims. Even as officials dismissed the disappearances, the villages themselves wove darker interpretations. Some pointed to the crumbling ruins of a watchtower on the eastern ridge, known locally as the Alte Wacht. According to local legend, the founders of Hohlbach had sworn oaths there to guard the valley's bloodline. The nature of that oath was never recorded, but villagers claimed the tower was avoided at night. Dogs refused to climb the slope, and shepherds found sheep mutilated near its base. Others whispered that beneath several of the oldest houses, bricked cellars ran deeper than wine storage would require. Children dared each other to knock on the stones of certain foundations, listening for hollow places. By 1854, with 4 brides vanished and no answers, Hohlbach gained the grim nickname, the widow's village among neighboring towns. No one from outside wished to marry into its families. The inn at the south end of the lane stood empty of guests, save for the rare traveling merchant, who often recorded in journals the strange, fearful looks of the townsfolk. One such entry, written by a Viennese grain trader on October 9, 1854, captures the suffocating atmosphere. The air in Hohlbach is as if every breath carries an unspoken grief. At the tavern, no man laughed. A fiddler played, but his bow never touched a merry tune. And when I asked after the missing women, the innkeeper's wife spat on the floor and crossed herself. Thus begins the record of Hohlbach, a place where joy turned swiftly to mourning, where weddings became the prelude to vanishings, and where even today no one knows what lay behind the bride's curse. The earliest hints of a deeper secret behind Hohlbach's tragedies appear not in parish records, but in fragments of land charters preserved in the archives at Brno. A brittle vellum deed dated September 14, 1598, transferring ownership of the valley from Baron Georg von Lichtenfels to 6 settler families, contains a curious clause: "The valley's daughters shall not be pledged beyond its borders without consent of the signatories." Historians at first dismissed the phrase as a routine medieval safeguard against loss of dowries, yet when considered alongside later disappearances, the wording takes on a different weight. Locals, by the mid-19th century, spoke of these 6 lineages: Weiss, Schiller, Loh, Reiter, Dittmar, and Schlagen, as die Gründerfamilien, the founding families. Their descendants dominated village life. They held the largest fields, controlled the brewing and milling, and occupied positions in church and council. Outsiders married in rarely, and when they did, it was almost always the bride who vanished. A letter preserved in the private collection of the Znojmo notary Johann Dohnal, dated March 2, 1856, describes the unease of a neighboring priest in the hamlet of Seefeld. "I hear reports from Hohlbach of missing wives, yet what strikes me more is the steadfast refusal of its elders to let investigators pry. They claim a pact is binding them. When I asked further, the farmer who guided me spat out a single word: Vector, the watcher. He would say no more." In that same year, Hohlbach witnessed its 5th disappearance. Teresa Dittmar, daughter of a miller, wed into the Reiter family in June 1856. The celebration was held in the courtyard of the Reiter barn, beneath paper lanterns strung from the rafters. Witnesses later testified that the evening passed without incident until a sudden gust extinguished every lantern at once, plunging the barn into darkness. When the candles were relit, Teresa was gone. Her shoes were found neatly placed at the threshold, their soles damp, though it had not rained in days. The villagers spoke more openly now of the curse, but officialdom clung to rational explanations. In the minutes of a district council meeting of July 1856, one magistrate recorded, "It is the conclusion of this body that the disappearances are acts of abscondment or domestic strife, not supernatural intervention. The notion of ancestral compacts or blood oaths has no place in modern governance." Despite this dismissal, by the 1860s, Hohlbach was shunned. Merchants chose longer routes to avoid passing through the village. Conscripts sent from the village were mocked as ghost husbands. Marriage prospects dwindled. Villagers began wedding later in smaller, quieter ceremonies, but still the vanishings continued. One of the most chilling testimonies comes from August 23, 1868, following the disappearance of Katharina Schlagen, aged 22. Her mother testified under oath before district officials in Znaimo. "I heard a sound as of whispering, though no mouths moved. The walls themselves seemed to breathe. My daughter clutched at her gown as if drawn toward the floor. Then she was gone. Not fled, not taken, gone as though the earth swallowed her." No evidence was recorded save for a faint scorch mark on the timber floorboards of the bridal chamber, a mark still visible when researchers visited in the 1930s. As the pattern lengthened, folkloric accounts merged with fearful rumor. Children in nearby towns told a rhyme, "Bride in wreath, bride in white, gone from her husband before first light." Old women whispered that the valley required a tithe of bride's payment to keep something at bay. Others argued it was not sacrifice but contract, that the founding families had bound their daughters to an unseen guardian of the valley in exchange for fertile fields and protection from plague. By the close of the 19th century, 12 brides had vanished, yet still no bodies were recovered. The ruined watchtower on the eastern ridge, the Alte Wacht, became the focus of suspicion. Shepherds spoke of strange gatherings there on midsummer nights, where 6 figures in cloaks were seen to light fires and carry garlands of white cloth. In 1881, a traveling teacher, Ernst Vogel, recorded in his diary, "The people of Hohlbach will not pass the ridge after sundown. I climbed to the old tower and found the stones arranged in a circle, fresh wax upon them, though no villager would admit to the deed. Their fear is not of wolves nor bandits, it is of their own." And yet, despite scattered inquiries, no thorough investigation was ever permitted. Each attempt floundered in missing documents, reluctant witnesses, or sudden withdrawals. In one case, in 1885, an entire trunk of parish records was reported lost when the rectory caught fire, though no other part of the building was touched. By the dawn of the 20th century, the bride's curse of Hohlbach was no longer merely a local affliction. It had entered regional newspapers, painted as both scandal and mystery. Reporters came, but often left with only fragments, as if something, or someone, ensured the full truth would never be carried beyond the valley. At the turn of the century, the air around Hohlbach thickened with something more than superstition. With the advance of rail travel and the growing appetite of newspapers for lurid mystery, the widow's village began to draw attention from beyond Moravia. The Viennese daily Neue Freie Presse published a feature in March 1902 titled Bräute ohne Gräber, Brides Without Graves. The article detailed 12 cases spanning 59 years and concluded with the damning line, "If the valley hides its dead, it hides also the guilt of the living." The publicity forced local officials to respond. In July 1903, the district gendarmerie dispatched Inspector Friedrich Kappel, a meticulous former army officer, to conduct a formal inquiry. His surviving notes, held today in the provincial archives at Znaimo, are startlingly precise. House of the Reiter family, bridal chamber dimensions 3.5 by 4 meters, timber floor. Noted a depression in the boards near the bedpost, irregular, charred. When tapped, cavity below resonated hollow. Villagers claimed ignorance. Writer Patriarch refused to permit dismantling. Remarkable hostility encountered. Capel's investigation stretched into the winter. He collected testimonies, compared them, and even sketched maps of the village cellars. Yet, despite his persistence, he was abruptly recalled in February 1904. The official report cited insufficient evidence to pursue criminal charges. Privately, in a letter to his brother, he confessed, "I was warned by men I did not know in the dark of the road to leave the matter. They spoke not as peasants, but as men of authority. I fear the valley is protected by interests beyond my office." Still, Capel had managed to recover one tangible object, a strip of linen embroidered with faded red thread, discovered wedged behind stones in the Schlagen farmhouse cellar. Laboratory notes from Vienna describe it as bridal fabric, torn, smeared with an oily residue of unknown composition. The fabric vanished from archives sometime before 1912. The catalog entry remains, marked missing. The turn of the century brought not only journalists, but scholars. In 1907, ethnographer Ludwig Kreutz visited Hohlbach, ostensibly to collect folk songs. His private notebook, unpublished until after his death, contains this chilling entry. "Spoke with a woman named Alvine Dittmar, aged 76. She recited an old verse said to be sung only among the 6 founding families. 6 to bind, 6 to pay, 1 shall watch and 1 shall stay. When pressed, she fell silent and wept. I have the impression of an oath, still binding across generations." More unsettling still was Kreutz's sketch of a carved stone he claimed to have seen beneath the floor of St. Walparga's vestry. The drawing shows a female figure with bound hands surrounded by hexagonal symbols. Kreutz wrote that the priest denied any knowledge of it and insisted the stone belonged to the foundations from before the church. The sense of dread only deepened with the disappearance of Marie-Louise Dittmar on April 18, 1910, the 13th bride. Her husband, Franz Berger, a man from Vienna, unconnected to the founding families, reported that she rose in the night and walked to the door as though sleepwalking. He swore under oath that the door opened without latch or key, though he had bolted it himself. Search parties combed the hills for weeks, finding nothing. Only a wreath of myrtle, damp with river water, was recovered at the threshold. By 1913, whispers of a bride's tithe became impossible to dismiss. Even the imperial bureaucracy, notoriously dismissive of rural superstition, admitted in a memorandum, "Persistent rumors of ritual obligation among the Hohlbach clans may contribute to ongoing disappearances. Whether such rumors conceal organized crime, secret society, or mere hysteria remains undetermined." Yet the Great War soon followed, scattering records and swallowing officials in larger crises. Many young men of Hohlbach died on the Eastern Front, but the curse, it seemed, remained. After 1918, the new Czechoslovak authorities inherited the file. By then, the village was scarred, fields untended, houses abandoned. Still, the weddings continued, though fewer now, and always under a shadow. A Czech journalist, Jaroslav Rybar, visiting in 1921, described the atmosphere vividly in his serialized report for Lidové Noviny. "No bells are rung for weddings in Hohlbach. The church door is opened only halfway, as though the groom fears what will enter. I asked one widow why she did not leave the valley. She replied, 'The pact follows us. It is written in the stones.' I have rarely heard such hopelessness in living men." By the mid-1920s, rumors spread that outsiders had begun disappearing too. A traveling salesman, a student on holiday. These cases were harder to confirm, but they lent new fuel to the legend. Journalists spoke of Hohlbach as a maw, consuming all who entered its marital rites. It was in 1927 that the first real physical breakthrough occurred. A group of stonemasons, hired to repair the sagging north wall of the Low farmhouse, discovered a concealed passage behind a false partition. The foreman's statement, preserved in police files, reads, "Behind the stones was a narrow stair descending into the earth.
The air was foul, with a stench of old rot. We found bones, small as from a child or woman, scattered and piled. Among them were scraps of cloth, laces and rings. We fled before finishing, for one man collapsed from the vapors. Authorities sealed the passage, citing safety, but photographs of the bones circulated secretly in Prague's university circles. The discovery confirmed what many had feared. The brides had not left Hohlbach. They had never left the valley at all.
The discovery of the bones beneath the low farmhouse in 1927 should have been the end of the mystery. Human remains, fabric scraps, jewelry. It was enough to indict someone, or at least to tear apart the veil of silence. Yet the opposite happened. Within weeks, the farmhouse wall was rebuilt, the masons dispersed without payment, and the official report vanished into locked drawers of the provincial office at Brno. Local police insisted the bones were animal, despite the photographs showing clearly jointed human femurs and finger bones no larger than a child's quill. What followed in the early 1930s was a series of private attempts to expose what officialdom would not. Chief among these was a small team of Prague students and amateur folklorists led by Otakar Benes, who had first seen the smuggled photographs. In October 1931, they traveled to Hohlbach under the guise of conducting an ethnographic survey. Their surviving notes, recovered decades later from Benes's estate, described nights spent in barns, whispers with terrified villagers, and above all, the growing certainty that the missing brides had been taken beneath the village itself. One entry from Benes's journal, dated October 18, 1931, reads, "The low stair is not singular. Old men tell of other houses with the same sound when the stones are struck, hollow, as if empty beneath. But when we press to see them, the families grow pale, their voices harden, and they demand we leave. There is no doubt the pact of the founders was bound in stone, and stone still hides it." On the night of October 22nd, the group bribed a laborer to let them into the cellar of the Slogan house, said to be one of the oldest in Hohlbach. They forced loose a section of mortar and crawled into a passage scarcely a meter high. Benes's companion, a student named Havel, later described the experience in a letter. "The air was damp, the smell sickly sweet, as if water and rot mingled. We crawled forward by candlelight. The walls were of unmortared stone, blackened as though by soot. After perhaps 10 meters, the passage opened to a chamber, round and no more than 3 meters across. The floor was littered with fragments of cloth, ribbons and bones. Among them lay a wreath of laurel, brittle and gray, yet still whole. At the center of the floor stood a stone slab carved with hexagonal figures. We did not dare to lift it." They photographed what they could and fled. 2 days later, Benes sent a package of negatives to a colleague in Prague. The package never arrived. Within a week, the group left Hohlbach under threats from villagers who accused them of mocking the valley's law. Yet rumors of the hidden chambers spread. In 1933, a new Czech administration official, Jan Hruby, ordered a discreet excavation. The order was recorded in his own hand, but no report survives. All that remains is a single memorandum dated December 3, 1933. "It is not merely bones. What was unearthed I cannot put to paper. The villagers insist it must remain sealed. I will recommend cessation for the sake of my men's sanity." The 1930s also brought foreign attention. German occult societies, emboldened by rising nationalist fervor, sought in Hohlbach a site of ancient power. One pamphlet circulated in Munich in 1936 spoke of blood unions between the soil and the daughters of Aryan stock. Though repugnant in tone, it confirms that word of the chambers had traveled beyond Moravia. But while outsiders speculated, Hohlbach itself suffered its 14th disappearance. In June 1937, Elizabeth Reiter, aged 20, vanished hours after her wedding feast. Witnesses swore the newlyweds were seen walking hand in hand toward their house, yet inside the bridal chamber, only the groom remained, dazed,
holding a torn sleeve of her gown. His testimony is the last taken before the German occupation of the Sudetenland silenced further inquiry. The room grew colder than winter, though the hearth burned. She turned her face to me, but it was not her eyes. They were filled with another gaze. Then she slipped away. Not backwards, not forwards, but down, as if the floor swallowed her. I swear to you, she did not scream. Only silence. The years of war that followed nearly erased Hohlbach from maps. Many houses were abandoned, the men conscripted, the women fleeing to relatives in safer towns. Yet the pact, whatever it was, endured. When Red Army troops passed through in 1945, they noted the church defaced, houses collapsed, and the watchtower on the ridge newly blackened by fire. No official mention of disappearances was made. Still, among the belongings looted from the Reiter household, a soldier recorded finding a narrow wreath made of hair braided with wire. It was discarded. By 1950, Hohlbach was a ghost of itself, scarcely 60 residents clinging to the valley. But the stories of its vanished brides had spread far wider, whispered now not just in Moravia, but in Vienna, Prague, and even across the border in Germany. Scholars debated whether it was mass hysteria, ritual crime, or something that resisted every rational category. The archives remained fractured, photographs lost, testimonies half-burned, and the valley, overgrown and silent, seemed to wait.
By the late 19th century, the shadows over Hohlbach deepened. The valley, once sparsely populated and pastoral, had seen its population decline after repeated disappearances of brides. Local families whispered of the Watcher, the invisible sentinel bound to the founding family's oath. Yet even as superstition solidified into ritual, the village continued its routines, farming the fertile floodplains of the Thaya and tending orchards that clung to the hillsides. It was in this uneasy calm that the events of the 1920s began to unfold, echoing centuries-old fear. In 1921, reports surfaced of children playing near the old Schiller homestead who claimed to see a bride in white wandering the misty lanes after sunset. One entry in the parish register, written by Father Matthews Vogel, reads, "On the evening of September 17th, young Anna Kolar, age 10, claims she saw a lady dressed for marriage walking barefoot along the stream. She ran home pale and trembling and swore she could hear whispers calling her name from the stones themselves." Though dismissed by the local council as childish fancy, villagers did not share the sentiment. Neighbors whispered that the valley itself had begun to react to the accumulation of vanished brides. Stones seemed hollow, cellars smelled faintly of laurel and decay, and the wind through the trees carried what some described as singing. It was in 1924 that the first tangible evidence emerged. A farmer named Anton Weber discovered fragments of fabric and a brittle wreath under the floorboards of his barn. The local constable recorded the find, noting, "Bones were present, small, delicate, as though they belonged to a young woman. Fabric remnants suggest a ceremonial garment. I do not claim to understand their significance." The farmer insists these must be related to the vanished brides of prior decades. The authorities made only a cursory examination, and the site was hastily covered. The parish priest, Father Vogel, intervened privately, writing to the district office, "The valley has its own memory. To dig here is to awaken what sleeps. Leave these matters be." Over the next decade, further anomalies occurred. Candles left in abandoned homes would gutter without wind. Footprints appeared on stone floors where no one had walked. Small objects, ribbons, combs, wreath fragments, would vanish and reappear months later, often near the ruins of the original Schiller and Reiter houses. Elderly villagers documented these occurrences in notebooks, which survive as fragments in the regional archive. One entry dated 1930 reads,
The children speak less now, and even the animals avoid the old house. We hear crying at night, soft, sorrowful, coming from the earth itself. No one dares to follow it. The culmination of these events occurred in 1932 during the wedding of Magdalena Reiter, the daughter of one of the founding families. On the evening of her nuptial feast, she vanished without trace. Her father, Friedrich Reiter, described in his statement to the parish council, "We celebrated as any family would. Magdalena smiled, and then she was gone. The room was still, yet I felt her presence leave like a cold breath through the hall. I called her name. No sound returned. Only the hearth flickered, as if acknowledging her absence." Subsequent searches of the house and the surrounding woods found no clues. A small braided wreath, identical in pattern to one photographed decades earlier under the Schiller floorboards, lay at the edge of the garden. The parish register records her as missing, but the family marked her as taken by the watcher, a euphemism whispered in the valley but unspoken elsewhere. These disappearances and the subtle evidence left behind solidified the valley's reputation. Even as the interwar years brought political unrest, Hohlbach maintained its isolation, its terraced orchards and stone walls absorbing both history and fear. Archaeologists and folklorists of the era would later note that the valley seemed resistant to intrusion, a place where the past was palpable in air, stone, and soil. By the mid-1930s, 14 brides had vanished, and the founding family's oath, never recorded in official documents, loomed over every household. Hohlbach had become not merely a place, but a repository of ritualized absence, where silence, stones, and occasional artifacts maintained the memory of those lost. As one anonymous note, discovered decades later in a parish ledger, reflects, "The valley remembers, the brides are counted, and the watcher watches still. To enter is to meet what the ancestors bound beneath the stones." This period, bridging the old legends and the tangible evidence of the early 19th century, set the stage for the investigations, disappearances, and discoveries of the 1960s and beyond, forming a continuous chain from myth to observable phenomena.
By the 1960s, Hohlbach had almost ceased to exist as a living community. Census figures from 1961 list only 27 permanent residents, nearly all elderly. Roofs had collapsed, fields returned to wild meadow, and the church of St. Walpurga stood shuttered, its bell removed by the state for scrap. Yet the place had not been forgotten. Students, amateur historians, and increasingly journalists began to treat the ruined village as a site of morbid pilgrimage. One of the earliest modern investigations was carried out in May 1963 by a team of architecture students from Brno, who came to document abandoned Moravian villages. Their leader, Milan Kotek, filed a brief report now stored in the university archives. Hohlbach presents extreme dereliction. Notable, the inn at the southern lane still intact, timber blackened, sign, zum Schwarzenwitter, faint but legible. Church roof collapsed, cellars accessible in at least 5 properties. In one, Schlagenhaus, discovered subterranean chamber resembling crude crypt, walls with soot markings. Bones present, fragmentary, mostly femoral and rib sections, seemingly human. One ring with initials TW recovered. Photography attempted, but film damaged by light leak, uncertain. When the students attempted to publish their findings, officials from the Ministry of Interior warned them against spreading superstition. Kotek later told a colleague, "We were told plainly, if we wrote of bones, we would lose our posts." The next significant account came from abroad. In 1971, the Austrian journalist Helene Markel, known for her exposés on rural poverty, traveled to Hohlbach with a photographer.
Her article, The Widow's Valley, published in Die Press, electrified readers. Markle described evenings spent in roofless houses, listening to the wind whistling through beams as though a woman keening. She recorded interviews with 2 remaining villagers, sisters, aged over 80, who spoke in dialect so thick it had to be translated. Their testimony was chilling. The pact was never written but spoken. 6 names, 6 families, 6 stones. Each time the valley hungered, one daughter must go. If she resisted, all would die. Our mothers told us never to wed, and so we did not. When pressed to explain what the valley hungered meant, the sisters grew silent and refused further questions. Markle's photographer, Ernst Huber, captured images of scorched markings on the cellar stones of the Lau house, resembling hexagonal figures. One photograph showed a wreath of hair braided with myrtle, half buried in dust. These photographs circulated widely, and for the first time in decades, Hohlbach's story entered international discourse. Letters poured into Die Press, some from families claiming ancestral ties, others dismissing it all as folklore. But not everyone doubted. In 1974, a small team from the newly established Institute for Criminology in Prague undertook what they called a forensic survey of the site. Their internal report, never officially released but leaked years later, catalogued no fewer than 17 sets of partial remains beneath 3 separate farmhouses. The bones showed signs of intentional breaking, with long bones split as though to extract marrow. Rings, hairpins, and scraps of bridal fabric were catalogued, some with initials corresponding to known missing brides from 1843, 1856, and 1910. One detail was particularly striking. On the underside of a stone slab recovered from the Schiller House cellar, investigators noted an inscription in archaic German. Bewahrt uns, Wachter, bis der Fluss versiegt. Preserve us, Watcher, until the river runs dry. The slab and its inscription were transported to Prague for analysis, but disappeared from storage in 1976. The inventory card was found later with the word entfernt, removed, scrawled in red ink. The investigators themselves gave contradictory recollections years afterwards. One, Dr. Pavel Zeman, told a colleague in 1982, "It was no mere crime scene. The air in those chambers pressed on the chest like a weight. We worked quickly, always with the sense we were watched. And the smell, not just rot, but something metallic, sharp, like blood long dried." By the late 1970s, the Czech state forbade further excavation, citing cultural preservation. But the rumors spread too far to contain. Hohlbach became known in folklore circles as Tal der Bräute, the Valley of Brides. Young thrill-seekers camped in its ruins, leaving graffiti in the gutted church. Some claimed to hear whispering at night, though no voice could be traced. One final incident cemented the legend. In August 1979, 2 university students from Vienna, Petra and Lucas, vanished while camping in the valley. Their abandoned tent was found by forestry workers. Inside were journals describing nights of chanting in the distance and figures moving along the ridge. Their last entry, written in Petra's hand: "The Watcher is near. We hear him under the stones." No trace of them was ever found. By the dawn of the 1980s, Hohlbach was fenced off as a danger zone, officially due to unstable structures. But among locals in southern Moravia, the explanation was simpler. The valley had claimed its brides and would go on claiming until its oath was fulfilled.
After the fall of the Iron Curtain in 1989, Hohlbach re-entered public consciousness in an unexpected way. Journalists, freed from decades of censorship, began to scour forgotten provincial archives for stories that had once been suppressed. In the spring of 1991, Mlada Fronta Dnez ran a 3-page spread titled The Bride's Curse: The Secrets of Hohlbach Valley. It combined fragments from old parish registers with interviews from surviving residents of nearby villages. For the first time, Czech readers learned in detail of the 19th century vanishings, the bone discoveries of the 1920s, and the suppressed forensic surveys of the 1970s. The article sparked a new wave of interest. Within months, West German and Austrian television crews arrived, dragging cameras and generators into the ruined valley. In 1993, an Austrian documentary team filmed among the remains of St. Walpurgis Church. Their sound engineer later testified, quote, "We were recording atmosphere tracks inside the nave. Our microphones picked up a constant low tone like breath through stone. None of us heard it at the time, but on playback it was clear, steady, and grew louder when the camera panned toward the altar foundation." The footage aired once on ORF before being abruptly withdrawn, the producers claiming technical flaws. Copies circulated underground, only intensifying fascination. Meanwhile, independent researchers began probing archives newly opened in Prague and Brno. Among them was historian Dr. Helena Starkova, who in 1996 published an article in the Journal of Moravian Studies arguing that Hohlbach's disappearances corresponded closely to years of failed harvests. She posited that the founding families may have maintained a clandestine ritual of human sacrifice, not supernatural, but communal violence disguised as myth to preserve authority during a crisis. Her paper cited chilling passages from a private letter written in 1856 by council elder Johann Schiller to his cousin in Vienna. Quote, "The oath is not ours to break. The valley feeds if it is fed. Better one bride than all our kin. Those who refuse will see their roofs burn and their cattle rot." Unquote. The authenticity of the letter has never been definitively proven, but its language echoed too closely to the oral testimonies gathered later in the century to be dismissed. Not all scholars agreed. In 2001, a British anthropologist, Simon Harrington, suggested the vanishings were a mix of abduction and mass hysteria. He pointed to scattered police reports of vagrants and deserters in the hills, arguing that the brides may have been taken by outsiders, while the villagers themselves, bound by shame, constructed the legend of the Watcher as explanation. His critics countered that such a theory could not explain the sealed chambers, the bones, nor the consistent absence of ransom or demands. As academic debate sharpened, sensationalism flourished. In 2004, a German tabloid staged a night vigil in Hohlbach, broadcasting live from the ruins. The reporters, visibly unnerved, claimed their compasses spun erratically near the watchtower ridge. One presenter, sweating, insisted she heard a, quote, "woman's voice singing from beneath the ground," unquote. Viewers dismissed it as theater, but interest in the valley surged once more. Perhaps the most striking rediscovery came in 2007, when a Prague archivist cataloging unmarked crates from the Ministry of Interior stumbled upon several sealed envelopes labeled Hohlbach, nicht öffnen. Inside were glass photographic plates dated 1931, clearly showing the chamber beneath the Schlagen house, bones arranged in concentric rings, and at the center a flat stone slab inscribed with symbols resembling a hexagon inside a circle. The archivist's own marginal note in the file reads simply, quote, "The slab looks less like an altar than a seal," unquote. The plates vanished soon after they were reported, borrowed by an unknown researcher, and never returned. Only photocopies survive. By the 2010s, Hohlbach had acquired the status of both folkloric legend and academic puzzle. Paranormal television crews camped there. Folklorists debated whether the rhyme "bride in wreath, bride in white" originated in Hohlbach or elsewhere, and local councils quietly discouraged visitors. Yet rumors persisted.
hikers who claimed to hear footsteps in ruined cellars, a Polish student in 2013 who allegedly disappeared for 2 nights before stumbling out of the woods unable to explain where she had been. The valley itself changed little. The Thaya still carved its slow path, fog still pooled in the meadows, and the stones of the ruined watchtowers still stood, blackened as if freshly burned. When asked why no permanent settlement had been re-established there, a regional planner replied offhand, quote, "The ground won't hold foundations. It shifts. It hollows." Unquote. And so the legend endured into the 21st century, a tangle of documented disappearances, corrupted records, missing evidence, and whispers of a pact never broken. What the founding family swore in 1598, what force, human or otherwise, they invoked, remains concealed beneath layers of stone and silence. Some historians argue it is nothing but coincidence and cruelty of time. Others believe the oath, the watcher, and the bride's tithe were real, not superstition, but a system of belief so deeply rooted that generations obeyed it even against conscience. What no one denies is this. From 1843 to 1937, at least 14 brides, each documented in parish registers, vanished on their wedding night in Hohlbach. None was ever found whole. And under the ruined houses, in the damp chambers where candles gutter and whispers seem to breathe through stone, something waits there still, sealed, or perhaps only sleeping.
When the Iron Curtain finally fell in 1989, the valley of Hohlbach, long forgotten in official discourse, emerged once more into public conversation. For 4 decades under Czechoslovak socialism, mention of the disappearances had been suppressed, relegated to the category of superstition or reactionary fabrication. Yet almost immediately after political change, local journalists began to dig into neglected parish and district archives. What they uncovered both shocked and fascinated a public eager for stories long buried. In April 1991, the newspaper Malada Fronta Danes ran an article entitled "The Bride's Curse: The Secrets of Hohlbach Valley." The 3-page spread pieced together fragments from 19th-century parish registers, interviews with elderly residents of neighboring villages, and stray mentions in suppressed police reports from the 1920s and 30s. It was the first time ordinary readers encountered the scale of the phenomenon. 14 recorded brides vanished on their wedding nights between 1843 and 1937, with no trace save for rumors and cryptic objects. One surviving witness, Josefina Marikova, then 87 years old, gave a startling interview from her retirement home near Brno. "I was a girl of 15 when they whispered about the last bride. They told us to close our shutters at night. My uncle said the Schlagen cellar was a mouth that swallowed women. The valley, it was already emptying. We did not speak of it aloud." The article caused a sensation. Television crews from Austria and Germany descended on the ruins, dragging cameras and portable lights into the remains of St. Walpurgis Church. In 1993, an Austrian documentary team spent a week filming there. Their sound engineer later recalled an unsettling anomaly. "Inside the nave, we set microphones for ambient sound. On playback, there was a steady, low tone, like a sighing through stone. It intensified when the camera panned toward the altar's foundation. We heard nothing at the time, only on the tapes." The broadcast was aired once on ORF under the title Tal der Braute, Valley of Brides, but was swiftly withdrawn from rotation, officially due to technical issues. Unofficially, rumors claimed the producers themselves refused to revisit the material. The opening of state archives in the 1990s provided new opportunities. Historian Dr. Helena Starkova, working at Masaryk University, unearthed a troubling letter dated 1856 from a village elder, Johann Schiller, addressed to a cousin in Vienna. "The oath is not ours to break. The valley feeds if it is fed. Better one bride than all our kin. Those who refuse will see their roofs burn and their cattle rot. Though the letter's authenticity remains debated, its phrasing matched oral testimonies later recorded by folklorists, making dismissal difficult. Starkova published her findings in 1996, proposing that the founding families had indeed practiced ritual murder, cloaking it in supernatural justification to maintain control during hardship. Not supernatural forces, she argued, but human cruelty, systematized violence enacted upon women to preserve communal stability during hardship. Her article sparked outrage, especially among descendants of families once connected to Hohlbach. By contrast, in 2001, British anthropologist Simon Harrington advanced a rationalist hypothesis. He suggested that the brides may have been abducted by deserters, vagrants, or traveling criminals, and that the legend of the Watcher evolved later as a means for villagers to conceal their failure to protect their own. Yet Harrington's theory failed to explain the sealed chambers, the repeated absence of ransom or demands, and the consistent symbolism of rings and wreaths. Amid scholarly disputes, the public imagination ran wild. In 2004, a German tabloid staged a live overnight broadcast from the Watchtower ruins. Their presenters reported compass needles spinning uncontrollably and claimed to hear a woman singing from beneath the ground. Though skeptics dismissed it as sensational theater, the broadcast reinforced Hohlbach's sinister allure. The most explosive rediscovery came in 2007 when a Prague archivist cataloging unmarked crates from the Ministry of Interior found glass photographic plates dated 1931. These images clearly depicted the Schlagen cellar, bones arranged in concentric rings around a central stone slab, marked with a hexagonal sigil inside a circle. In a marginal note, the archivist wrote, "The slab resembles not so much an altar as a seal." Within weeks, the plates vanished from the archive, borrowed by an unknown researcher and never returned. Only photocopies survive, their grainy outlines nevertheless chilling. By the end of the first decade of the new millennium, Hohlbach was firmly cemented as both folkloric legend and scholarly puzzle. Paranormal enthusiasts camped in the ruins, while academic conferences debated its meaning. Local councils quietly discouraged visitors, citing unsafe structures. Still, the story spread, gaining a strange new life. As one Czech journalist concluded in 2009, it is not only the brides who vanished, it is the truth itself, drawn into the hollow of that valley. Each attempt to seize it collapses into silence. By the early 2010s, Hohlbach had long been abandoned, yet it had acquired a peculiar notoriety among both folklorists and thrill-seekers. The valley's ruins, now largely reclaimed by forest and fog, drew amateur historians, urban explorers, and television crews, each hoping to glimpse the remnants of the bride's curse. Social media amplified these expeditions. Photographs of crumbling houses, warped cellars, and scorched watchtower stones circulated widely, often accompanied by accounts of unexplained sounds, cold spots, and fleeting shadows. In March 2011, a small Czech documentary team led by historian Marek Hohlbach attempted a systematic survey of Hohlbach. Hohlbach's journal, later published in an academic collection, details both the practical and psychological obstacles of the expedition. The valley resists intrusion. Even in daylight, fog clings to the lower fields. Dogs refuse to enter. Our instruments recorded strange fluctuations in magnetic readings near the Schiller House. At night, footsteps echo from empty cellars. Some crew members refuse to sleep indoors. Hohlbach's team cataloged structural remains, attempted measurements of cellar dimensions, and documented symbolic markings in the stone, hexagonal carvings, faint soot traces, and depressions consistent with past concealment of slabs. One remarkable entry records the discovery of a fragment of a bridal wreath beneath rubble in the Schlagen cellar, entwined with human hair and decayed laurel. The wreath was brittle but unmistakable. It matched descriptions from 1931 photographs. The same design, the same technique. Whoever made it did so centuries ago, yet the air around it felt freshly disturbed. We retreated before further examination. In August 2013, Hohlbach became the site of an alarming incident. Two Austrian students, Petra and Lucas, were reported missing after camping overnight near the ruins. Their tent was found intact, but both were absent. Forest rangers later discovered Petra wandering along the Thaya River, disoriented and refusing to speak of what had occurred. Lucas was never found. The police report, heavily redacted, simply notes, "Witness statements inconsistent. Subject, Petra, appears in shock. No other persons observed. Investigation inconclusive." By 2015, the story of Hohlbach had moved beyond national attention. International journalists, paranormal enthusiasts, and documentary filmmakers were drawn to the valley. A German television crew filmed near the old Reiter farmhouse, and the lead cameraman reported malfunctioning equipment. All battery-powered devices drained within minutes. Our cameras jammed. We heard distant singing, faint, female, but no human was visible. We left at dawn. None of the footage was usable. Academic interest also intensified. In 2016, archaeologist Dr. Klara Nemcova published a paper in Central European Historical Review analyzing the distribution of missing brides, discovered artifacts, and symbolic stone carvings. She concluded, "While some may argue for coincidence or folklore, the consistency of archaeological findings, particularly the recurrence of arranged bones, bridal items, and inscribed slabs, indicates a long-standing systematic pattern. Whether this pattern stems from human agency or ritualized belief remains unresolved." Despite official warnings, the valley became a locus for dark tourism. By 2018, small groups of enthusiasts attempted overnight stays, leaving journals that echoed centuries-old motifs: whispers in empty cellars, unexplained breezes, and visions of shadows along ruined walls. One entry, left anonymously in a hollow tree near the watchtower, reads, "We counted 14 doorways, 14 windows, yet the valley seemed to have 15 eyes watching us. We did not sleep." By the late 2010s, Hohlbach was firmly entrenched as both an archaeological and folkloric enigma. Scholars debated rational explanations, while journalists and thrill-seekers perpetuated an oral tradition that had begun nearly 2 centuries earlier. The ruins themselves remained dangerous, unstable, and partially sealed, yet the valley's atmosphere seemed unchanged, fog-laden, silent, and palpably heavy with unresolved history. The disappearances, once documented as parish records, police reports, and eyewitness accounts, now existed alongside modern photographs, journal entries, and fragmented digital media. Each new generation of visitors encountered the same core mystery. 14 brides vanished. Bones, wreaths, and slabs corroborated elements of legend, yet no definitive cause, motive, or perpetrator were ever confirmed. In 2019, a Prague archivist cataloging previously unexamined Ministry of Interior files discovered several sealed envelopes labeled Hohlbach, nicht offen. Inside were glass photographic plates from 1931 showing the Schlagen cellar with bones arranged in concentric circles around a central stone slab inscribed with a hexagon. Marginal notes in the archive read, "The slab appears less like an altar than a seal. Recommend preservation, not exposure." The plates were reportedly removed days later, loaned to an unspecified researcher, and never returned. Copies circulate privately, but the originals remain missing, perpetuating the mystery.
By the end of the decade, Hohlbach existed simultaneously as historical site, haunted ruin, and cultural symbol. The valley was depopulated, forests had reclaimed the fields, and the watchtower lay in partial collapse. Yet the story persisted. Scholars, journalists, and folklorists all recognized that some force, social, psychological, or otherwise, had been at work for centuries. The bride's vanishings were no longer mere historical events, but a living enigma, a haunting legacy encoded in stone, wood, and memory.
By the early 2020s, Hohlbach had ceased to be a village in any practical sense. The last permanent resident had died over a decade earlier. Roofs had collapsed, the church of St. Walpurga had been reduced to rubble, and the Thaya River had slowly reclaimed the valley floor with silt and floodplain vegetation. Yet the memory of Hohlbach persisted, paradoxically alive through archives, folklore, and digital media. Researchers, journalists, and enthusiasts return again and again, drawn to a history that seemed to resist closure. The valley now exists primarily as a locus of narrative, a palimpsest of fear, secrecy, and documentation. Scholars debate the nature of the disappearances, often invoking a matrix of social control, ritualized violence, and superstition. In 2021, anthropologist Dr. Eva Korbelova published a review in Central European Folklore Studies noting, "In Hohlbach, we present an extreme case in which social cohesion, fear, and ritual may have intersected. The disappearances of the 14 brides cannot be explained by conventional crime alone. The surviving artifacts and testimonies suggest a pattern maintained over generations, either through cultural compulsion or deliberate concealment." Local folklore, meanwhile, remains vivid. Children in nearby villages still recite the centuries-old rhyme, "Bride in wreath, bride in white, gone from her husband before first light." Visitors report sensory phenomena, inexplicable chills in ruined cellars, distant whispers, and the sensation of being observed. One tourist, documenting her visit in 2019, wrote, "I walked the old lane past the Reiter house. The fog rolled in thicker than I expected. Every step felt watched, though no one was there. I swear I heard someone singing, but the valley was empty." Physical evidence is fragmentary but persistent. Fragments of bridal wreaths, laces, and hair interwoven with laurel continue to surface in cellars and ruins, though most were removed or destroyed during the 20th century. Photographs from the 1930s and 1970s, now partially lost, depict arrangements of bones, stone slabs inscribed with hexagonal symbols, and depressions in timber floors consistent with concealment of ritual objects. Scholars note that the repeated design elements, concentric circles of bones, the placement of wreaths, and inscribed slabs indicate a deliberate system rather than random acts. One of the most enigmatic discoveries occurred in 2020 when an archivist examining a private collection in Prague found notes attributed to Otakar Beneš, the 1931 investigator. Among them was a sketch of a hidden chamber beneath the Slagen house. The chamber was depicted as circular, approximately 3 meters in diameter, containing scattered human bones and a stone slab. A handwritten note in the margin reads, "The watcher waits, the oath is not broken, the valley hungers still." No verification of the chamber's existence has been possible. The collection itself was incomplete, and many items remain untraceable. What distinguishes Hohlbach in contemporary study is the interplay between documented history and the sustained narrative of fear. Over nearly 2 centuries, records, artifacts, oral testimony, and physical remains coalesce into a story that is partly tangible, partly legendary. The community of the valley, once structured around 6 founding families, appears to have preserved both the social and symbolic framework that enabled the disappearances.
Whether through deliberate violence, cultural compulsion, or some now unrecognizable ritual, these events left a residue that modern observers cannot fully interpret. The valley also functions as a cautionary emblem. Regional tourism boards, while promoting local history, warn against overnight stays in the ruins. Archaeologists note that cellars are unstable and roof timbers rotten, but guides admit that the sense of unease is more than physical. Even the wind sounds different here, one historian said in 2018. It carries the weight of centuries of silence. Despite these warnings, Hohlbach has inspired exhibitions, television documentaries, and novels. It exists simultaneously as a historical case, a legend, and a locus of imagination. The disappearances of 14 brides, once mere parish entries, are now embedded in regional and even international cultural memory. And yet unresolved questions endure. Why did the disappearances cease after 1937? What became of the stone slabs inscribed with pleas to the watcher? Were the observed phenomena in modern investigations merely psychological, or do they reflect something deeper in the valley's architecture and history? In conclusion, Hohlbach remains a liminal space between history and legend, documentation and myth. Its story is incomplete, fragmented, and resistant to explanation, yet its impact is undeniable. The valley stands overgrown, silent, and empty, but the weight of the past, of 14 brides vanished, of oaths maintained, and of secrets preserved beneath timber and stone, is palpable to anyone who ventures there. As one anonymous note discovered in a 1970s archive concluded, "The watcher is patient, the oath is long, the valley has not yet finished its feast."
Hohlbach endures, both as a real place and as a repository of human fear, ritual, and memory. Its legend persists because some histories cannot be closed, only observed, recorded, and remembered, even when the truth itself slips forever beneath the stones.